Here we go. Can you hit record? Does it record everything from before? That's wild. Huh. It says 4 minutes, but I haven't been recording for 4 minutes. Anyways, go ahead and read this quote, and then the question that you're answering is, the quotation uses imagery to convey a sense of, is it A, inner turmoil, B, stubbornness, C, guilt, or D, exaggerated self-confidence? I think all of the above describe my life except for D. Not D. All right, I have responses so far from Sierra, Emilio, Celeste, Conlon, Alexandra, Angel, Cecilia, Violeta, waiting on 6 more. Why are you guys picking that answer? Okay, I'm going to close this out in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inner turmoil is like mixed feelings inside, like they're having internal conflict, like upset almost. Okay, y'all, these are the responses. I don't know why you chose D. Why did you do that? Why would you do such a thing? Anyways, the answer is A. A, you can tell that the reader, you don't get the whole poem that this is from, but you can tell that the writer has some feelings about the fact that this person is still painting. The imagery here, December, when the child is old and the trees no longer silver but black fingers scratching a gray sky. Like you can, like it's just like this like gloomy mood that shows that there's some sort of like sad feelings, like inner conflict, bad feelings attached with the fact that this person is still painting. So yeah, you really wanted to focus on the end parts there, old trees, black fingers scratching the sky. I'm not sure where you guys got the self-confidence thing from, since this person's not talking about themselves. Self-confidence would be like they're talking about how great they are themselves. Okay, here's another one. In this excerpt, the author uses imagery to... I'll let you read the excerpt and the choices there. Pay attention to the imagery, so the parts where it seems like it's painting a picture or you can visualize what they're talking about. Those are the lines that you're going to want to focus on in order to answer the question. All right, and I have responses so far from Alexandra, Sierra, Dante, Darian, Leilani, Violetta, Celeste, Angel, Vivi, Conlon, waiting on 6 more. Chris, Cecilia, Emilio, Angel, Autumn, Josh. And I'm going to go ahead and close this up in 5, 4, 3, very good, 2, come on, Chris, there we go, 1, thank you. Yes, you guys did so much better. It is C, to emphasize the challenges he faced in getting home. Some people also chose A, B, and D. Although, like, we can maybe infer that he missed seeing his son, or I'm completely blanking. B is also relevant to natural disasters, right? They talk about like the earth splitting, but the focus is on the fact that like he's trying to over exaggerate here. Like there were so many things that happened, and that's why I couldn't get home. And the imagery of like the earth splitting open and the sky opening is what shows like the imagery there, and that is what shows that he tried to get home but he couldn't. The challenge of it, right? Like the earth splitting open would be a challenge. All right, last one, y'all. In this excerpt, the author uses imagery too. Focus on how like the pond is described, the descriptive words there, that would be the imagery. All right, I have responses so far from Alexandra, Celestia, Dante, Darian, Emilio, Cecilia, and Violetta, and I'm waiting on 8 more, 7 more, 6 more. Great. And I'm going to close this off in 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Come on, Josh. Okay. I hope you, thank you, Josh. I hope you guys enjoyed my goat screaming. Anyways. The correct answer is A, to show the beauty of the frozen pond. Wow, typo, Hernandez. 2 typos. Y'all need to call me out. Someone else shows imply that one should not skate. There's nothing that sort of like highlights the danger. If it talked about like, if it described very like descriptively how the ice was breaking, maybe then that's something that that could be inferred. But right now it's just talking about how pretty it is. All right, y'all, we're going to talk about tone and narrators, and then we're going to listen to chapter 5 of Animal Farm, and then you'll have some practice and then an exit ticket all on Pear Deck. A couple of announcements here. Today is the absolute last day to finish Renstar. I'm going to be messaging people today if you still need to complete Renstar. After that, you will not be able to make that assignment up in the gradebook because the test will close. BWA number 7 grades have been put in for BWA number 7, so those appeared yesterday. There was a 10-point curve, so I gave you a curve of 10 points in the gradebook from your original score. Message me if you are curious about your original score or if you were absent and you didn't take the exam and you need to take it. There are a lot of you, so the way that the test was, it was 9 questions. So if you missed one, you got an 89. So you automatically got a B if you missed just one. So with the curve, you'll see that you're at a 99. That means that you missed one. That's with the curve. However, you will only see 100. So there are a few of you who have 99s, but the only people who got 100, so perfect scores without the curve, were Rebecca, Nayeli, Jackie, Donna, Miss Alize, Drea, Mario, Giselle, Seth, and Eddie J. Those are 100. So show them some love. Give them a virtual pat on the back. All right, y'all. Any questions about BWA or anything before we move on? Very silent little chat box today. Oh, look, there we go. Good job. Okay, tone. You guys know tone, but then when you see the question of tone, you're like, what is that? It's attitude. It's the writer's attitude, or like almost like the attitude's feeling towards a subject or towards an audience. Characters also help to create like a tone, to create a mood, okay? So tone is generally conveyed through choice of words or the viewpoint of a writer on a particular subject. I put the little like emojis there because the word choice that the authors use is basically them like emoji reacting to a subject, right? So I'll show you some examples today while we're reading, but the word choice that they use is maybe them like silently judging or cheering on or rooting for a certain character. But it's all in the word choice, and from the word choice we can infer how the author is feeling about a certain subject or how they're feeling about the characters or what they're trying to get you to think. Okay, so tone words. So you don't have to remember all of these, obviously, but I'm just going to read some of them so you can get examples of like how we can describe the tone of a text. So the tone can be like afraid, can be apologetic, like if it's an essay maybe, right? Bitter, complimentary, also maybe like an essay. Let's see, detached, proud, humorous, joyful, mocking, right? Like our text, Animal Farm, is very mocking. Let's see, horrific, restrained, sarcastic, sentimental, sympathetic, urgent. Our text also has like an urgent tone to it, right? But those are all examples of how you can describe tone. And those aren't the only examples in the world. Cool. All right. So a lot of times on Star, you're going to see this word tone combined with the word narrator. Okay, so just a quick refresher here on what's the difference between a narrator, an author, and a character. Okay, so an author is the person who writes the story, George Orwell. The narrator is the person who tells the story. For Animal Farm, we don't know who the narrator is. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the character are all the characters who play out the story. So like Snowball, Napoleon, Boxer, etc. The cat. Cat doesn't have a name. Those are all characters. The one thing that I highlighted here is that for like those essays, the expository essays, the ones that are just like fact, like for example, in yesterday's BWA, you read one about water bottles, right? For that one, the author and the narrator were the same person because she was the person who wrote the essay and she was the person who's like sort of speaking her voice throughout the whole essay. So for nonfiction, for essays and articles, a lot of times the author and the narrator can be the same person. But for nonfiction, it is not likely. All right. So the person telling the story is the narrator. They can tell it in 3 different ways, right? They can be the first person, like accounting. I don't know if you guys have read Perks of Being a Wallflower. I think that's one of your summer reading books. I think that's a book where the narrator is an I, right? He's telling his own story. Second person is a you, a little bit more rare. And then third person omniscient is the most common and what we see in Animal Farm. So it seems to be this person who is outside the story, who knows everything the characters are thinking, knows everything the characters are saying to each other, knows everything the characters are feeling, knows all the background context, but isn't in the story. So that is like a third person, omniscient, Big Brother is watching, knows everything kind of narrator, which is what we have for Animal Farm. All right, y'all. We are going to read, and while we read, there are going to be questions. You can go ahead and look at my screen here, and I am going to pause us at 2 minutes and 18 seconds. So look at my screen on Teams so I can project Lay Audiobook. Let me pull that up. And then I have to unplug my headphones. All right. We're going to pause in 2 minutes so that way we can talk more about this tone and narrator stuff.
Chapter 5.
Ooh, that's loud.
As winter drew on, Molly became more and more troublesome. She was late for work every morning and excused herself by saying that she had overslept, and she complained of mysterious pains, although her appetite was excellent. On every kind of pretext, she would run away from work and go to the drinking pool, where she would stand foolishly gazing at her own reflection in the water. But there were also rumors of something more serious. One day, as Molly strolled blithely into the yard, flirting her long tail and chewing at a stalk of hay, Clover took her aside. "Molly," she said, "I have something very serious to say to you. This morning I saw you looking over the hedge that divides Animal Farm from Foxwood. One of Mr. Pilkington's men was standing on the other side of the hedge, and I was a long way away, but I am almost certain I saw this. He was talking to you, and you were allowing him to stroke your nose. What does that mean, Molly?" "He didn't. I wasn't. It isn't true," cried Molly, beginning to prance about and paw the ground. "Molly, look me in the face. Do you give me your word of honor that that man was not stroking your nose?" "It isn't true," repeated Molly, but she could not look Clover in the face, and the next moment she took to her heels and galloped away into the field. A thought struck Clover. Without saying anything to the others, she went to Molly's stall and turned over the straw with her hoof. Hidden under the straw was a little pile of lump sugar and several bunches of ribbon of different colors. 3 days later, Molly disappeared. For some weeks, nothing was known of her whereabouts. Then the pigeons reported that they had seen her on the other side of Willingdon. She was between the shafts of a smart dog cart painted red and black, which was standing outside a public house. A fat, red-faced man in check breeches and gaiters who looked like a publican was stroking her nose and feeding her with sugar. Her coat was newly clipped, and she wore a scarlet ribbon round her forelock. She appeared to be enjoying herself, so the pigeon said. None of the animals ever mentioned Molly again.
Okay, so we're going to pause there and just talk about a couple things. Just come to your Pear Deck, look at your Pear Deck screen, so that way you can see the example. You're going to, in the next 2 turns, you are going to label the tone. Okay, so here I've done an example, I'm going to talk about it, and then you're going to do the next 2 times by yourself on Pear Deck when I pause the audiobook. So this first quote here, if we're looking at it, on every kind of pretext, she would run away from work and go to the drinking pool, where she would stand foolishly gazing at her own reflection in the water. So this person talking is the narrator, right? It's not Snowball, it's not Napoleon, it's not any one of the other animals. It is the narrator, the person telling the story. From this word, like foolishly, we can tell that the narrator is like judging her pretty hard. It's a judgmental tone. It's a condescending tone. Like he knows what she should be doing and she's not doing the right thing, right? So he's judging her decision here to still be like in allegiance to the human. So judgmental tone really comes from the fact that he calls her foolish, like flat out. Next quote here that I wanted us to look at was where he says, she appeared to be enjoying herself. So the pigeon said, none of the animals ever mentioned Molly again. Like that line is like dun dun dun. Like it's like ominous, you know what I mean? They're just like, okay, here she is. Nobody ever talked about her again. Like she's gone. So ominous is that kind of like weird, like suspicious, like, well, what happened, like feeling. And it has a tone where, like, it sets a tone that makes us skeptical about the ways that animals are handling conflict, right? So here's this horse that decides to go against what they have said, and then she just disappears, right? So then it already starts to build this feeling of like, okay, maybe they don't have everybody on board, and what are they going to do when that happens? Okay. So I'm going to pause this again here at 4 minutes and 24 seconds, and then you will type in what is a tone that is conveyed by that quote that I have on the screen. I'm going to lock our screens here and pull this back to the audiobook, and then we'll answer that question when I pause the audiobook here.
In January, there came bitterly hard weather. The earth was like iron, and nothing could be done in the fields. Many meetings were held in the big barn, and the pigs occupied themselves with planning out the work of the coming season. It had come to be accepted that the pigs, who were manifestly cleverer than the other animals, should decide all questions of farm policy, though their decisions had to be ratified by a majority vote. This arrangement would have worked well enough if it had not been for the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. These two disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. If one of them suggested sowing a bigger acreage with barley, the other was certain to demand a bigger acreage of oats.
Even that, you can say like the narrator's tone, this isn't the one we're answering yet, but where he says like they disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. That's almost like a parental tone, right? Or also like a judgmental tone.
One of them said that such and such a field was just right for cabbages. The other would declare that it was useless for anything except roots. Each had his own following, and there were some violent debates. At the meetings, Snowball often won over the majority by his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. He was especially successful with the sheep. Of late, the sheep had taken to bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, both in and out of season, and they often interrupted the meeting with this. It was noticed that they were especially liable to break into 4 legs good, 2 legs bad at crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Snowball had made a close study of some back numbers of the farmer and stock breeder, which he had found in the farmhouse, and was full of plans for innovations and improvements. He talked learnedly about field drains, silage, and basic slag, and had worked out a complicated scheme for all the animals to drop their dung directly in the fields at a different spot every day to save the labor of cartage. Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that Snowball's would come to nothing, and seemed to be biding his time. But of all their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that took place over the windmill.
All right, I'm going to pause this right there. I'm going to switch our screens back to Pear Deck, and I'm going to unlock your screen here so you can answer this question. Give me 1 second. Okay, all right. So what you're going to do is you're going to type in your text box there. In this part that I have sectioned out, the narrator conveys a tone of what towards Snowball. So what, remember, tone also means attitude. So what is the narrator's attitude towards Snowball? How does he feel about him? I put a circle around the word schemes because that's the one where I think like really reveals the narrator's like feelings towards him, right? Because he says Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, where he's basically calling Snowball's ideas schemes. You don't really call the ideas of someone that you trust, a leader that you trust, to be scheming. You would say that they're planning, right? So that word choice reveals a lot. I'll give us, let's see, another 30 seconds to come up with our tone word. What is the narrator's tone or attitude? Remember, tone means attitude towards Snowball. What does he think about Snowball? You just really need like a word or a few words. That's what tone would be. Good. See some good ones? All right, let's see. These are Conlon's, Sierra's. Angel had one of the similar answers. I like this one too. Chris's. Okay, so here's some that I started. Suspicious, right? The narrator is suspicious. Or like the word that I almost would have gone for, which is a combination of all of these, is mistrusting, right? If this person, if he thinks Snowball is scheming, like he doesn't trust him, so that matches with disapproving and questioning. Skeptical is like a higher level tone word for questioning, but all correct. It's a very good job, y'all. All right, your next one is going to be at 6 minutes and 40 seconds. I'm going to lock our screens here and we'll come back when I pause the audiobook.
In the long pasture, not far from the farm buildings, there was a small knoll which was the highest point on the farm. After surveying the ground, Snowball declared that this was just the place for a windmill, which could be made to operate a dynamo and supply the farm with electrical power. This would light the stalls and warm them in winter, and would also run a circular saw, a chaff cutter, a mangle slicer, and an electric milking machine. The animals had never heard of anything of this kind before, for the farm was an old-fashioned one and had only the most primitive machinery, and they listened in astonishment while Snowball conjured up pictures of fantastic machines which would do their work for them while they grazed at their ease in the fields, or improved their minds with reading and conversation. Within a few weeks, Snowball's plans for the windmill were fully worked out. The mechanical details came mostly from 3 books which had belonged to Mr. Jones. 1,000 Useful Things to Do About the House, Every Man His Own Bricklayer, and Electricity for Beginners. Snowball used as his study a shed which had once been used for incubators and had a smooth wooden floor suitable for drawing on. He was closeted there for hours at a time, with his books held open by a stone, and with a piece of chalk gripped between the knuckles of his trotter, he would move rapidly to and fro, drawing in line after line, and uttering little whimpers of excitement. Gradually, the plans grew into a complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels, covering more than half the floor, which the other animals found completely unintelligible, but very impressive. All of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came, and were at pains not to tread on the chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily round the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans and snuffed at them once or twice, then stood for a little while contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plans, and walked out without uttering a word. The whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmill.
All right, give me 1 second to switch this over to the pair deck. Let these people in the class. Okay, here is the quote that you are going to identify a tone for this time. He walked heavily around the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans, and snuffed at them once or twice, then stood for a little while, contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then he suddenly lifted his leg, urinated over the plants, and walked out without uttering a word. So the following quote creates a tone of what amongst the animals? So this one's a little bit different. This one's not like the narrator's tone towards the animals, but what is the tone or the attitudes amongst the animals? What are the feelings amongst the animals? This creates a tone of what? Good, I see Autumn typing, Dante typing, Leilani typing. You just sort of like one word. Leilani. Good Emilio, good Alexandra, good Cecilia, good Angels typing, Celestis typing. I'll give us 30 more seconds here to finish our tone word. Oh, geez. Come on, Hernandez. Y'all need to yell at me. I'm over here. It's work related. Okay, let's see. Let's show some responses. Bum, bum, bum. Disrespect. That is correct. Bitterness. Yes. It shows that some animals are bitter, right? That they are not in charge. And that turns into something that becomes worse. Yeah, like a tone of like hesitancy or like being skeptical, untrust, controversy, power, very good, revenge. Impertinent. Rude, uncooperative. That's sort of what I was thinking, was just like conflict, chaos, like absolute chaos. Like people over here peeing on the ground because they're angry. I mean, I guess animals do that, but they're still, it's pretty savage. Okay, y'all. Now you guys are going to practice doing the same thing with multiple choice questions, and these will be your exit ticket. This question here, I will pause for us to answer at 9 minutes and 34 seconds.
Snowball did not deny. Build it would be a difficult business. Stone would have to be carried and built up into walls. Then the sails would have to be made. And after that, there would be need for dynamos and cables. How these were to be procured, Snowball did not say. But he maintained that it could all be done in a year. And thereafter, he declared, so much labor would be saved that the animals would only need to work 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that the great need of the moment was to increase food production, and that if they wasted time on the windmill, they would all starve to death. The animals formed themselves into two factions under the slogan, vote for Snowball and the 3-day week, and vote for Napoleon and the full manger. Benjamin was the only animal who did not side with either faction. He refused to believe either that food would become more plentiful or that the windmill would save work. Windmill or no windmill, he said, life would go on as it had always gone on. That is, badly. Apart from the disputes over the windmill, there was the question of the defense of the farm. It was fully realized that though the human beings had been defeated in the Battle of the Cowshed, they might make another and more determined attempt to recapture the farm and reinstate Mr. Jones. They had all the more reason for doing so, because the news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals on the neighboring farms more restive than ever. As usual, Snowball and Napoleon were in disagreement. According to Napoleon, what the animals must do was to procure firearms and train themselves in the use of them. According to Snowball, they must send out more and more pigeons and stir up rebellion among the animals on the other farms. The one argued that if they could not defend themselves, they were bound to be conquered. The other argued that if rebellions happened everywhere, they would have no need to defend themselves. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and could not make up their minds which was right. Indeed, they always found themselves in agreement with the one who was speaking at the moment. At last, the day came when Snowball's plans were completed. At the meeting on the following Sunday, the question of whether or not to begin work on the windmill was to be put to the vote. When the animals had assembled in the big barn, Snowball stood up and, though occasionally interrupted by bleating from the sheep, set forth his reasons for advocating the building of the windmill. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said very quietly that the windmill was nonsense and that he advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. He had spoken for barely 30 seconds and seemed almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this,
All right, we're going to go ahead, pause there, move back to the Pear Deck really quickly, and answer this question. Let me project that screen over. There we go. In this excerpt, the narrator conveys a tone of A, relief, B, surprise, C, humiliation, or D, pride. What is the tone of that piece there? How does the narrator feel? I'm going to set a timer here for 30 seconds. So far, I have answers from Leilani, Angel, Celeste, Sierra, Emilio, Cecilia, Violetta, Chris, Autumn, Vivi. You're not focusing on like Napoleon's feelings. You're focusing on the narrator's feelings. So not the character, the narrator, not Napoleon, the narrator. Oof. All right, I saw some answers. I'm going to unlock this really quick because I didn't do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh my goodness. Okay, locking the screens. This makes me sad. Okay. The answer is C. C, surprise. I think if you chose, wait, I'm wrong. B, surprise. I knew it was surprise. If you chose C or D, I think you're focusing on how the characters feel, which is like a common misconception to fall into, is if you focus on how the characters feel, right? So you're not worried about how Snowball feels. Snowball does feel prideful. Napoleon probably does feel humiliated at this point. But really what we're focusing on is that the narrator is surprised and building up almost this like, what is that called? Oh, what is that called? Suspense. Because Napoleon is not one to just like stand up, talk quietly, and sit back down. So you can tell that the narrator is shocked that Napoleon is doing this. It sort of creates another tone that is sort of like suspicious, because this is not like Napoleon. We know Napoleon. All right, your next question. Oh no, I didn't put the time for myself. What am I gonna do? Okay, I'll pause it when we get here, and we'll answer this question. Go ahead, come back to me here on the audiobook.
Snowball sprang to his feet and, shouting down the sheep, who had begun bleating again, broke into a passionate appeal in favor of the windmill. Until now, the animals had been about equally divided in their sympathies, but in a moment, Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In glowing sentences, he painted a picture of Animal Farm as it might be when sordid labor was lifted from the animals' backs. His imagination had now run far beyond chaff cutters and turnip slicers. Electricity, he said, could operate threshing machines, plows, harrows, rollers and reapers and binders, besides supplying every stall with its own electric light, hot and cold water, and an electric heater. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which way the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar sidelong look at Snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard him utter before. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside, and 9 enormous dogs wearing brass-studded collars came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, he was out of the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the long pasture that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever. Then the dogs were gaining on him again. One of them all but closed his jaws on Snowball's tail, but Snowball whisked it free just in time. Then he put on an extra spurt and, with a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the hedge and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where these creatures came from, but the problem was soon solved. They were the puppies whom Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately. Though not yet full grown, they were huge dogs and as fierce-looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs had been used to do to Mr. Jones. Napoleon, with the dogs following him, now mounted onto the raised portion of the floor where Major had previously stood to deliver his speech. He announced that from now on the Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted time. In future, all questions relating to the working of the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by himself. These would meet in private and afterwards communicate their decisions to the others. The animals would still assemble on Sunday mornings to salute the flag, sing Beasts of England, and receive their orders for the week, but there would be no more debates. In spite of the shock that Snowball's expulsion had given them, the animals were dismayed by this announcement. Several of them would have protested if they could have found the right arguments. Even Boxer was vaguely troubled. He set his ears back, shook his forelock several times, and tried hard to marshal his thoughts. But in the end, he could not think of anything to say. Some of the pigs themselves, however, were more articulate. 4 young porkers in the front row uttered shrill squeals of disapproval, and all 4 of them sprang to their feet and began speaking at once. But suddenly, the dogs sitting round Napoleon let out deep, menacing growls, and the pigs fell silent and sat down again. Then the sheep broke out into a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for nearly a quarter of an hour and put an end to any chance of discussion. Afterwards, Squealer was sent round the farm to explain the new arrangement to the others. "Comrades," he said, "I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is a pleasure. On the contrary, it is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make your decisions for yourselves. But sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades, and then where should we be? Suppose you had decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine of windmills. Snowball, who, as we now know, was no better than a criminal."
I'm going to go ahead and play this audiobook out to the end, and then we'll answer the 2 last questions at the end, just to save time.
"He fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed," said somebody. "Bravery is not enough," said Squealer. "Loyalty and obedience are more important. And as to the Battle of the Cowshed, I believe the time will come when we shall find that Snowball's part in it was much exaggerated. Discipline, comrades. Iron discipline. That is the watchword for today. One false step and our enemies would be upon us. Surely, comrades, you do not want Jones back?" Once again, this argument was unanswerable. Certainly the animals did not want Jones back. If the holding of debates on Sunday mornings was liable to bring him back, then the debates must stop. Boxer, who had now had time to think things over, voiced the general feeling by saying, "If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right." And from then on he adopted the maxim, "Napoleon is always right," in addition to his private motto of, "I will work harder." By this time the weather had broken and the spring ploughing had begun. The shed where Snowball had drawn his plans of the windmill had been shut up, and it was assumed that the plans had been rubbed off the floor. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, the animals assembled in the big barn to receive their orders for the week. The skull of old Major, now clean of flesh, had been disinterred from the orchard and set up on a stump at the foot of the flagstaff beside the gun. After the hoisting of the flag, the animals were required to file past the skull in a reverent manner before entering the barn. Nowadays, they did not sit all together as they had done in the past. Napoleon, with Squealer and another pig named Minimus, who had a remarkable gift for composing songs and poems, sat on the front of the raised platform, with the 9 young dogs forming a semicircle round them and the other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat facing them in the main body of the barn. Napoleon read out the orders for the week in a gruff, soldierly style, and after a single singing of Beasts of England, all the animals dispersed. On the 3rd Sunday after Snowball's expulsion, the animals were somewhat surprised to hear Napoleon announce that the windmill was to be built after all. He did not give any reason for having changed his mind, but merely warned the animals that this extra task would mean very hard work. It might even be necessary to reduce their rations. The plans, however, had all been prepared down to the last detail. A special committee of pigs had been at work upon them for the past 3 weeks. The building of the windmill, with various other improvements, was expected to take 2 years. That evening, Squealer explained privately to the other animals that Napoleon had never, in reality, been opposed to the windmill. On the contrary, it was he who had advocated it in the beginning, and the plan which Snowball had drawn on the floor of the incubator shed had actually been stolen from among Napoleon's papers. The windmill was, in fact, Napoleon's own creation. Why then, asked somebody, had he spoken so strongly against it? Here Squealer looked very sly. That, he said, was Comrade Napoleon's cunning. He had seemed to oppose the windmill simply as a maneuver to get rid of Snowball, who was a dangerous character and a bad influence. Now that Snowball was out of the way, the plan could go forward without his interference. This, said Squealer, was something called tactics. He repeated a number of times, "Tactics, comrade, tactics," skipping round and whisking his tail with a merry laugh. The animals were not certain what the word meant, but Squealer spoke so persuasively, and the 3 dogs who happened to be with him growled so threateningly, that they accepted his explanation without further questions.
Tactics, comrades, tactics. You gotta hate Squealer. You really do. If you don't hate Squealer, you're not paying attention. Just kidding. Okay. You can like Squealer, I guess. I like the voiceover they do of him. All right. Here's your second exit ticket question. What do both speakers have in common? So go ahead and read Squealer's quote here and Boxer's quote here. Oh, oops, there you go. Great, I got responses from Alexandra, Alex, Autumn, Chris, Sierra, Emilio, Dante, Leilani. Make sure that you're choosing what both of them, just from these quotes, appear to be expressing. And I made another typo. Jeez. Don't make lessons when you're tired, Hernandez. Experience instead of experience. Experience. It's fun to say. Y'all should try it. All right. There's only 8 seconds left. Come on, Josh. Just gonna lock in 4, 3, 2, 1. Josh, you wanna answer really quick? 3, 2, 1. No? Okay. All right, y'all. Correct answer was answer choice C. From here, they're both experiencing feelings of compliance, right? Squealer has been compliant the whole time. He's all on board, right? Like, he's one of the ones. He's one of the pigs. But Boxer, at this point, has been sort of silenced. He's going to go along with it. We can sense that he doesn't really, isn't all bought in from his heart, but he is complying. He's going to do what they say. All right, last question here. In this excerpt, the words orders, hoisting, and reverent give the community of animals a tone that is what? Naive, hypercritical, militant, or sarcastic. Naive means like, I can't think of a good way to explain it, like almost like childish, where you like expect things to be good or just like overly hopeful. Hypercritical means like very critical, nitpicky. Militant means like the military. Give us 1 minute here, and then class will end. I have answers already from Vivi, from Angel, from Alex, from Angel, from Conlon, Dante, Emilio. Good. Leilani, Angel, great. Got about 45 more seconds here. All right, I'm gonna shortcut this timer here and say 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, y'all. The correct answer is C, militant. C, militant. Although there are some characters, again, in this book that are naive, some that are hypercritical, and some that are definitely sarcastic. If you pay attention to the words that the question is asking you to pay attention to, orders, hoisting, reverent, it's all, Flagstaff is one that I left off there. It all seems very militant, like they have orders they have to follow. Very militant. Okay, y'all, that is where we are going to stop for today. Message me if you have any questions about your BWA or anything like that, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Hope you have a good day. Bye, Darian. Bye, Alexandra. Bye, Cecilia. Bye, Celeste. Autumn didn't even tell me bye. Disrespect. All right, goodbye, y'all. Have a good day.